Hello and welcome to BizNation, your home for micro and small business help. Join us as we unpack all the pain points in starting or running your small business. If you're looking for support in business, join us on Facebook, Micro and Small Business Support Group. Your host, Kerry Zarb, brings you discussions, interviews, and many hints and tips to get you all set in your business. So sit back and enjoy as we launch into today's episode.
Today we're going to talk about SEO, three letters that most business owners fear, and even the idea of working it out can bring feelings of massive overwhelm. Joining us today is David from Sixgun. David is the managing director based in Melbourne, a self-confessed workaholic, and he tries to play the guitar, and he recently got engaged. Congratulations, David, and welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Kerry. It's a pleasure to be here. I love the introduction, by the way.
Oh, no, it was a good one. It was a bit of a no-brainer, but came together quite well. So thanks so much for helping with a few little things for that intro. So, David, can you give us a quick introduction for Sixgun, where it began?
So Sixgun started about 3 years ago. The Proprietary Limited was set up. And, it really started from the philosophy of digital marketing could be done better. So I'm a big fan of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. One of the principles that he talks about quite a bit in that is creating win-win situations. And, my experience working inside agencies wasn't, it really highlighted that things could be done better. And, the clients could certainly win more, the staff could win more, and the agency can win as a result of that. So, when you look after people, you do great work. When you respect and look after your staff, great things happen all round. So I wanted to create an agency that really embodied that philosophy. And that's really where it started. In terms of channels and things that we do, we're a digital marketing agency focused on the performance marketing end of the spectrum, which are things like search engine optimization, Google Ads, paid social, those type of channels.
Excellent. Great. So for the listeners, what is SEO exactly?
So SEO stands for search engine optimization, and it's ultimately about getting those organic placements in Google's search results. Now, we use Google interchangeably with search engines because in Australia, the market share is just so high. But it also applies to things like Bing and other search engines as well. But generally, what it's all about is taking those organic positions in the search results. So, for example, if you're a photographer in Melbourne, you want one of your customers to type in photographer Melbourne, click enter. Inside Google, you've got the ads that show up at the top, and then immediately under the ads, you've got the organic listings, as well as the Google My Business listings as well. And Google My Business gets encompassed by SEO too, and there's a bit of a strategy for that. So ultimately, as you can imagine, when people type something like that in, you want to show up as high as possible on Google's list. And doing it organically means that you don't have to pay on a per-click basis like their ad system, for example.
Excellent. Okay. So how can it help support a small business's growth?
So it's definitely one of those channels that, it's something that can firstly take a little bit of time to get moving. So it's not an overnight type of strategy. That's probably the first thing to keep in mind. But in terms of being able to rank for some of those core keywords, like in the example of photographer Melbourne, obviously there's a massive benefit to be ranking highly in the list, getting, organic traffic as a result, and then ultimately leads and conversions down the track. So, visibility is key. So, it can definitely support small businesses in that way, getting them the visibility they need to support the business sales, conversions, all of that side of things. And the good thing about SEO is that, often small businesses are localized. So for example, let's say you are a local plumber and you service, a suburb, the suburb that you live in perhaps, and a few suburbs around you. SEO is a great channel because people will type in, plumber Ringwood or plumber Mount Waverley. And because it's localized, the competition is quite low, which means that, using a strategy like SEO, you can get traction, relatively easily.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
For that type of channel. So, it's one of those things that it can definitely support, it can definitely support, additional traffic, additional sales. And it's in some industries, not all industries, it's a bit of a no-brainer to use it and begin to play around with it.
Yeah. And you mentioned before about, our organic rankings with SEO. So that comes from keywords on your website. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, there's a number of factors that influence SEO performance. And we like to break it down into 3 distinct buckets. The first bucket is architecture. And inside architecture is really all the technical nitty-gritty setup of the website. And encompasses things like, there's title tags, for example, going to the website. Things like how the sitemap is set up, how the structure of pages and internal linking set up on the website. There's a really, big list that we go through to kind of, make sure everything's in order. But there's that technical piece. And then you've got content on the website, which is, that's where a lot of the keywords are going to find themselves in terms of that strategy. And then you have what's called link building. And link building is all about, getting other websites on the internet to link back to your website. And that ultimately acts as a vote. And that's how, a lot of authority is passed and how SEO performance is assessed ultimately. But it's not just about the quantity. It's also about the quality when it comes to link building.
Yeah, understand. And how exactly does it work?
So it's a little bit of a complicated mechanism. And Google isn't very fond of sharing what the exact algorithm is in terms of what the ranking factors are. But, if you take those 3 buckets, once you've, set up the website from an architecture standpoint, and then you move through that into content and then you move through to link building, it's really a combination of, if you envision an excavator or something like that, they're the 3 levers that we have to pull. That's what we've got to play with. Google's whole ethos is around creating a high quality experience for users. So when you think about a high quality experience for users, that encompasses, the design elements, making people stick around to the site, giving them great content, answering their questions that they're typing in, all that kind of stuff. But then, those 3 buckets really influence the technical layer of what you need to do, the specific tactics to then rank a website.
Right. Okay. So if I was a small business owner, because it's so overwhelming, like even those 3 letters, a lot of business owners just look at them and kind of cringe and sometimes run away and don't even want to start to think about it. But if I was a small business owner, where would I get started? What's the first step?
So, the first thing is probably to decide if you have the time to learn about SEO, or if it's better to find a provider that can help you deliver SEO. Now, if you've got the time, learning SEO as a business owner and other digital marketing skills would have to be really quite high on the list of things to learn about. So if you've got the time, learning about SEO is a really good way to approach it. And there's so much great content out there. It's remarkable. You can type in, there's so many guides, there's so much information, there's so much free stuff about it. And it's a pretty big topic. But just beginning the search, and, there's some really good hubs of information. moz.com is a really good place to start for beginners, because there's some really great guides around how things work and some of the basics and getting an understanding of that. So I'd say if the person has time to do it, and, because of the situation we find ourselves in with COVID-19 at the moment, perhaps, they have a little bit more time than they'd like, spending that time on, learning some marketing initiatives that can help get their business out of situation they're in could be a great way to use that time. That's probably step 1 in terms of what someone should be doing. If they're looking for a provider, there's a lot of good service providers that do SEO well in Melbourne, so they won't be short of finding someone that they mesh with and that they trust and that they feel can deliver.
Yeah, yep. And you mentioned a website there, so I'll pop that link in the show notes for the audience. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges as a small business owner is, where are we going to get our information from that's actually correct?
Yeah.
And that's a massive challenge in itself, because like you said, like, the internet's just exploding with information and YouTube tutorials and everything's available online, and it's just a matter of typing in the right words to get what you're looking for. But yeah, like, I'm sure there's a lot to learn about it, and obviously you've been working on this for some time in your business, so I'm excited to have you here because I need to understand SEO. So I was super keen to have this chat with you. So when is SEO a good channel to pursue?
So usually what we do at the first part of, a discovery session with a client, for example, is we look at a combination between search volume. So how many times, people in Australia or people in the area, for example, are typing in the particular key terms that they want their business to come up for. So search volume and competition. So let's take an industry like fashion. Fashion is particularly hard to pursue through an SEO channel because if you type in a term like red dress, right, the brands that are going to come up are all of the biggest players in Australia. Red dress isn't a search term that Google deems to be localized. So, they know that, online shopping, so they're not preferencing people based on the local level at all in a search like that. So if you're a fashion brand, for example, I would be looking at things like social media is a stronger way to begin than SEO would be, for example.
Yeah.
But let's say you are, a local plumber. That's quite a good example because there's a localization factor. People make those searches with the location added into the term. And because of that, you're able to get traction much, much faster in that way. So, what it comes down to is how competitive your industry is and how localized you can be with your offering. That's really what it comes down to. So in industries where localization can't really happen, for example, if you have an e-commerce store selling fashion items that don't have a particular USP, and they're just like, it's a black dress, there's nothing defining about it that can be used in the way that the keywords are searched. Sometimes there are, depending, on things in the fashion space. It might be active wear, it might be a number of different terms you can throw in there to kind of get that different level of competition. But generally speaking, SEO works best, particularly in the small business space where resources are limited, where the competition is reasonably low. You're not fighting big national kind of organizations as a part of it. And there's a localized element to how it can be done, or the keywords just aren't that competitive in the industry in general. So they're the kind of things that, from a small business perspective, you'd be looking at to determine if SEO is worth pursuing or not pursuing.
Yeah. So my takeaway from that is if you're running a service-based business and you're very much, like, for example, if you wanted to be known across Melbourne or something like that, or even your particular suburb. So that's obviously got a lot more power to it in the SEO space. But if you're selling a product online, like you said, e-commerce, then it's probably needs a little bit more strategy behind it. Is that where we're going?
Yeah, definitely. Because e-commerce generally doesn't have there's no location attached to how that works. And then usually, if you're in a space that is, saturated at any level, SEO is going to be hard to really get working. Now it's not, SEO is one of those things that, you can always get to the point you want to get to. It's just a matter of resources and time. And sometimes those numbers are just insane. So you don't bother.
Yeah, fair enough. Awesome. So David, tell us a little bit more about SEO, like just any kind of hints or tips that you've got for a small business owner and something that like a takeaway from this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's definitely some places for people to start in terms of the tactics they can use. And one of the first tactics would probably be around having some idea around the keywords that you want to rank for and the keyword research piece that comes right at the start before you really begin implementing anything on the website itself. Now, a lot of keyword research comes down to common sense, having that relevancy, understanding what your customers are typing in. If you're in business as a local plumber, for example, people are going to be typing in plumber suburb. That's how that kind of thing works. And, if you're a photographer in Melbourne and you want to type Melbourne, photographer Melbourne, for example, is a keyword that would be on your list. The common sense is a big part of it. You can also use the Google Ads Keyword Planner tool, which gives you some information around search volume for those terms. And then something else that, a small business owner might want to do is, review the list of search results for these particular terms to determine how competitive the other brands are. So, something that we look at, probably a tool that might be hard for a small business owner to justify purchasing, but we use a tool called Ahrefs, for example. And one of the things that we do as a part of our keyword research is to look at the number of referring domains, which is essentially the backlinks in a way, each of the listings in the first page has for the keywords that we want to rank for. And from that, we can determine competition. Because sometimes your competition isn't necessarily who you think it is digitally, because they might have other brands might have a stronger presence online. They might have more backlinks, for example, more referring domains. Whereas some of the players that you might deem to be a bit more your competition, they might have a weaker presence online. So keyword research is probably number one, determining kind of what people are typing in, having an understanding of that, even if it's at a very basic level, making sure that those keywords are getting added to the website in the right way. And usually what we like to do is called clustering. So, we basically would cluster a set of keywords to a particular page on a website, which basically means you would have, so let's say you're a plumber, for example, and let's say you have a few different services. You've got a service for block drains. You've got a service for installation of appliances. You've got a gas fitting service, for example, all the standard plumber things. Now you want to have a page for each of those services. And on each of those service pages, you want to make sure you're using the keywords from the keyword research in the content, in the page title, in places like the meta description where it can be bolded if you come up in the search results, things like that. So using the keyword research on the pages in a structured and specific way on a per page level is probably the next kind of simplest thing for a small business owner to do at that tactical level. And then the other thing that is probably one of the most trickiest things, but there's a few easy ways to begin, is the link building side of things. So, are there any associations that you're a part of? Is there any accreditations that you have where you can be listed on their website and get a backlink? Do you have any industry connections that you can reach out to that perhaps have a blog on the subject and you can somehow get a link through that? Do you have suppliers and dealers that you're either paying or they're paying you, that there's a relationship where they could potentially list you on their website? There's a lot of these things that you can be doing that are really SEO can be very technical. And there's a lot of different ways to do all sorts of things, including link building. But there are some ways to do it in a bit more of a fashion that's suitable for a small business owner that doesn't need to know all the nitty-gritty details.
Yeah. And one of the things you mentioned was the metadata. So my understanding of that, and I've had this in the forefront of my brain for some time, even what we call our images that are in our website can make little bits of differences. Like, if you've got an image, like you say, about the plumber and he's got, like a job that he worked on or something like a gallery, maybe he did a bathroom or something like that, then having the right description of that image can hop into that. Yeah.
100%. So there's a few different things in that space. I mean, the biggest and most important one from an SEO perspective is the title tag. And the title tag's that section that, you hover over in the browser and then, you get the description of that page. And that's the same thing that's used in the search results that's, blue and underlined. That's ultimately kind of the heading for that listing in search results. And that's by far the most important aspect of metadata and how that works, because that has a very big impact on search performance by itself. And then there's also the meta description, which is a little bit of that blurb that sits under that title, which doesn't directly impact search performance, but it does indirectly, because the aim of a meta description is to increase the click-through rate, and the click-through rate does impact search performance. So in a way, it's an important aspect. And then things like you've mentioned as well, you can have tags on particular images that is useful to how Google interprets that image. Google's getting very, very smart in terms of how very smart in terms of how they can actually read images. So you can actually do reverse image searching. I don't know if you've ever used this function before, but it's remarkable what can be done there. So Google's getting to a point where it can really, see what an image is and categorize it outside of a manual, tag that we would add.
Mm-hmm.
So things like that are getting a little bit less important, but they're still valuable in a number of ways to add.
Yeah. And I like that you mentioned that reverse image search, because I did that recently because we've got a veggie patch out the back, as you do when COVID hits. And we had this unknown plant and it was like, oh, is that a weed or is that a plant? So I took a photo, popped it into Google and straight away, oh, weed. Yep, that's got to go. So yeah, it's amazing how it works. And definitely, I think you're right. Google's just always getting smarter and hopefully helping small business actually get known and get present out there. So, David, something that I ask all of my guests to the show is, what is a positive takeaway for you from COVID-19? It's been such a negative time for a lot of small businesses and people in general. So what's a positive takeaway that you can share with us?
Look, I think it's made us reflect on some of our business processes in terms of both reducing costs inside the business that wouldn't have happened without such a dramatic change, which will, serve us well into the future. And at the same time, I would say, we have been focusing a lot of our energy on marketing and sales initiatives, just to make sure that, we keep moving in the right direction. It's an interesting time because, when the tap gets turned off and there's less money coming into the business, people have that mindset of cutting costs, and marketing sometimes gets tied up in that equation. But if you, at the same time, if you want more business, if you want to grow, then you need to do marketing. So it's this crazy, it's this double-edged kind of sword in a way. And we've been fortunate to be able to kind of push resources, time, energy into that aspect. And it's, it is starting to pay off. So I would say, those two things, definitely.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, David. So where can we find you?
So the website's the best place. I'm sure you'll add that in the show notes, but it's sixgun.com.au. All the information about our business and things like that are on there. And, all the social channels, feel free to look me up on LinkedIn and Facebook and all that kind of stuff, where we're all over the place. So I'm sure you'll find us.
Fantastic. Thanks, David. I will pop those in the show notes for the listeners. And thank you so much for being on the show. It's been amazing, and a couple of great takeaways for small business owners, particularly on the research and getting to understand and certainly not fear SEO, I think is a really good point to make.
Thanks so much for having me on the show, Kerry. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to the BizNation podcast, your home for small business help. If you're looking for support in business, join us on Facebook, Micro and Small Business Support Group. You can find the link on our website, biznation.com.au. Tune into future episodes for more discussions, interviews, and many hints and tips to get you all set in your business. Until next time, stay safe, stay well.